Welcome to this week's edition of Taiwan Outlook. I'm your host, Chien-min Chao. With the rise of China and the coming of the holding of the Summer Olympic Games in Beijing, China has received a lot of international attention. So what is the present state of China and what is the future of China? And these are the topics we are hoping to talk about today. And our guest today is Professor Chien-min Chao of Graduate Institute of Development Studies at National Cheng University. And Professor Chao is a very famous China expert. Professor Chao, welcome to our program.
Hello, good to be here.
And as we know that China just finished holding its National People's Congress last week, what are the major policy issues in this National People's Congress?
The National People's Congress of China is like our parliament. It's a parliament in the West. In the past, it used to be called a rubber stamp.
That's right.
It means that it didn't have much functions. But I think a lot of progress has been made in recent years, especially in the last 5 years. In the 5 years that the new session is set to continue. And basically, I think legislation has been increased. The function of legislation has been increased. A lot of laws have been written to the rule of law. I think has been one of the weakest points in China's political development, especially during Mao's years. And I think to that purpose, I think China has deliberately taken, I think, great pain to write a lot of new laws.
That's right.
But other than that, if you are talking about oversight I other words, how to supervise the work of the government, I think it's relatively still young.
That's right.
I think it still doesn't provide much supervisory function against the government.
But the government also present work report to the NPC.
That's right.
From the work report, do you read anything different or interesting or important?
Well, yeah, this is a work report. Usually, it's no without exception. Without exception, it has been given by the premier. The report is said to single out the most important achievements in the past 5 years,
That's right.
and also the most important things the government is said to do in the next 5 years. So it's really very important. It's not very long, but it contains a lot of important things that we need to adhere to.
Anything that we should definitely pay attention to in the work report?
Well, if you don't have much time to see what has been going on in China's politics, I think this is good, very small paper for you to get some understandings about China's politics. I think it says a lot about what the Chinese government has been doing in the past 5 years and what the problems the country is facing today and what are their policies, what policies they are going to take in order to overcome those problems.
That's right. And what are the major challenges that set in the report about China's economic and political reforms?
In the past 5 years, I think starting in 2002, that's 6 years ago, and ended in 2005, 3 years ago, China, I think one of the most important achievements in the past 5 years, I think is the scrapping of the agricultural tax.
That's right.
Because, we all understand the problems in the agricultural sector has been very heavy. And the peasants, people working in the rural area has been, taken to the streets to protest against the government. So it has become a center of contention. It's also become a center of instability.
That's right.
In order to bring stability back to China's rural area, I think the Chinese government made a very important decision to get rid of this agricultural tax. And I think it has been hailed as one of the most important achievements. However, by getting rid of one problem is also given rise to another problem.
That's right.
Because once the agricultural tax are stopped to be levied by the local government, then the local government doesn't have much budget as before. So I think local governments today, especially at the Xiang and the Zheng governments, and also village committees, I think they have a great difficulties getting enough money to develop their places.
Yeah, I think that has to do with so-called social unrest or disturbance over the years. And as we know that the government in China now emphasizes the so-called harmonious society.
That's right.
And in other words, they want to ease the problem, ease the tension in a local level. How has that achieved or progressed?
We all understand China's economy has been developing really very fast. According to the report, I think China's GDP, gross national economic product, in the past 5 years increased 2/3 of its original size. Yeah. This is a very good expansion. And along with when the economy is developing this fast, it's not possible to keep everything under control.
That's right.
So I think this is exactly why the government wants to promote the idea of the central and make it center of the Hu Jintao's policy to bring harmony to the Chinese society. I think it's no easy work because instability is abundant. Not only you find instability in the rural area because of it's poor and it's not easy to get affluent, but also you find instability in the urban areas when especially when your houses are being torn down. Yeah. And if you are unemployed and if you don't have enough insurance, then you don't have much choice but to take to the streets. So I think this is a huge problem for the government. And
as you mentioned, that China's economic growth, is very impressive. Still maintain the so-called double-digit growth.
Yes.
But the thing is that they're concerned about the so-called gap between the rich and the poor.
Yes.
And do you think that the gap is still growing wider or become narrow?
China used to be the country having the least gap between the rich and the poor.
That's right.
That's because the government under Mao Zedong pushed a policy, what was known as the egalitarian economic development policy. Yeah. So the free market was deprived, and also job work was offered by the government. Yeah. So it was relatively equal in income between the rich and the poor. There wasn't a rich class. There wasn't
equally poor.
Equally poor. Some people would prefer that term. But so there was no wonder the country was very, the gap between the rich and there wasn't really a gap. Yeah. Mao Zedong, I think he was the highest paid person in China, but his income was about 3 to 5 times the income of an average citizen. So this is really not a lot of money, paid to the highest salary person. But since the 1980s, when China started to reform its economy and open its market to the outside world, and China's gap between the rich and the poor is expanding really very fast. I think China is one of the fastest. The gap is widening. Is one of the fastest places in the world, if not the fastest. I suspect that China is the place which has the fastest growing gap between the rich and the poor. That's right. I think we all are familiar with the term Gini coefficient.
Gini coefficient. Yeah.
Right. If it's between 0 and 1. The higher the coefficient, the wider gap between the rich and the poor. And right now, I think China's the Gini coefficient is about 0.47. This is pretty bad because if you are over 0.4, this is red line. It is alarming point if you get to that point. China today is 0.47. Some people, some scholars in China would make that number by 0.6. Really? So this is considering in such a short period of time, in 20 years, China has been able to outperform many countries in this regard.
But is that the price that China has to pay to continue to keep that path of growth?
China's, I think, economic development strategy has been built based on the kind of to exploit the wide among the huge sector of the population which remains poor.
Yeah.
So China has a limitless source of cheap labor. I think that has been the engine of China's economic development.
Yeah.
But if you want to keep, if they continue that as their major economic strategy, then the gap is bound to be there.
But in addition to the cost of growing inequality, there are also other costs such as environmental costs and so on. As we know that in this Chinese New Year there was a snowstorm and so on. And is Chinese government recognizing that kind of seriousness and then try to fix the problem?
I think they do. You remember years ago, China welcomed all sorts of investments from Taiwan. Whatever, if as long as you bring capital money to China, China opened its hands and you are welcome. And that was when China was basically deficient of foreign capital. Today, I think China is relatively wealthy, relative to what used to be 20, 30 years ago. So I think Chinese government today also recognizes if they do not do things fast, if they do not do something fast, then their pollution, water pollution, air pollution, and land pollution, and desertification is going to be, it's already out of control.
That's right.
So I think in the past 5 years, we have seen major pollution, chemical substances have been poured into major rivers in Songhua River and Taihu area, Yangtze River. So it has, I think China, I think the government understands the problems.
But I think for some people, the Chinese economy is still quite good, in general.
Yes.
But there are also concerns about inflation.
Yes.
So when we come back, we'll talk about the real economic realities in China and what are possible opportunities and also risk that we have to face in trying to invest in China and trying to doing trades with China. And stay with us. We'll be back after a few moments.